Okay. So again, welcome everyone. We have people from, I've seen people from Ghana, people from Nigeria, Zimbabwe. We expect people from Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, really wherever you are joining us from, again, welcome. This is an inaugural webinar of what we have now named Graduate Information Session, or GIS. And so this is GIS 1. And I will tell you in a minute what these are about. But we are very happy to have you. I'm looking forward to this meeting and having a great discussion with all of you in the end. Before I start my presentation, and I want to do a few introductions. So I guess I'll start with myself. My name is Gabriel Gihana. I'm originally from Rwanda. It's where I was born and raised. I completed my undergraduate education at California Baptist University in California, of course. And then my PhD at Indiana University in Bloomington. And I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. For those of you that we've not met before, I'm also a co-founder and currently director of AfriSNet, which I will get to tell you all about in a minute. We are also with Nutifafa Senanu, who is the chair of AfriSNet's Education Committee. Nutifafa is originally from Ghana. She's an optometry doctor from KNUST. So hooray to KNUST. We have a very good representation from there today. She's currently a PhD student at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. We also have Jonathan Van Franken. John is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Medical School. And he is also the chair of the AfriSNet research training team that focuses on the research internship projects of AfriSNet. I want to thank John and Nutifafa for joining me today. They have experience in graduate school applications, doing research, research communications, and many questions that you might have in mind. And they're here to help you answer your questions, really have a good discussion with all of you. Once again, thank you everyone for joining. And without further ado, I am going to share a PowerPoint slide deck and we'll dive right into it. Okay. So I hope that everyone can see my slides. John, Nutifafa, do you see my slides?
Yeah. Yes, we do. Yeah, awesome.
Great. Yep. Okay, so the title of this presentation is the ins and outs of research-based graduate education, but it's not really going to go into very deep details. This is sort of a preface to a more detailed presentation, especially about graduate school applications that we're going to do next Saturday, February 18th, and we will communicate the time with you after our discussion today. And I am going to do this presentation, and Notifafa is helping coordinate the whole meeting. So she's the one who is admitting you into the meeting room, and she's going to also steer the discussion at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much, Notifafa.
Welcome.
Okay. Okay, so briefly about AfriSNet. AfriSNet stands for Africa STEM Network, and this is an international nonprofit organization that is incorporated here in the United States. And our goal is to really increase the overall participation of Africans in competent research in STEM fields all over the world. And we focus specifically on students, so young Africans, although we've also worked with lecturers and really any African who reaches out to us that we can help, we try and do our best to help them. This is our website here shown on this picture, and that's the link if you have not visited it yet. But if you go to our website and register, you will find a lot of information resources that are geared towards graduate school, especially in the United States. And I'm going to explain later why we focus on the United States, although what we talk about here or about the United States is really applicable to many other countries. So at AfriSNet, we provide comprehensive and organic mentorship. Comprehensive means that we try to connect and work with you when you're still an undergraduate student, but we continue to mentor you when you become a graduate student. And the hope is that we will continue to mentor you and really support each other, actually, even beyond the graduate school phase. This organization was incorporated in 2019, so it's a relatively young organization, and I think the best is yet to come. So organic mentorship means that it grows from within. So we mentor you, and then you become a mentor. So a very good example here, right at the beginning of AfriSNet, I actually mentored Notifafa, who is now a PhD student and the chair of the AfriSNet Education Committee, and now mentoring so many students every year. We have a forums page that is intended to be used for discussion. So if you get to our website, you will notice that it's really built to create a network in a real sense where you can actually connect with people and befriend them, kind of like you friend somebody on Facebook or connect with them on LinkedIn. And if you post questions on this platform, people can see them and give you answers. This forums page has not really worked as much as we hoped it to. And again, that makes sense for a yet young organization, but I really encourage you to take advantage of it and use it as our network grows. AfriSNet has also established a research internship program. This is still very specific to institutions. It really goes through strategic partnerships with very specific universities in Africa. We've worked with Lagos State University in Nigeria, KNUST in Ghana. We're now also working with the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. We have contacted also Addis Ababa University. We have connections in Rwanda as well. And there is a number of American universities that are also involved in this process. Just to name a few, we have Indiana University that really pioneered the program. The University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill is also getting involved. Dartmouth College, Stanford University. and expect to see more universities getting involved so we can train more students. The idea here is that African undergraduate students actually are able to come to the United States and spend a few weeks doing research and getting training in a laboratory. Overall, really, what we hope to build is a large network of people who are Africa aware and like-minded to really push the research boundaries in Africa and increase the global participation of Africans in research. I don't know if you are all aware, but Africa comprises around, if not over, 16% of the global population, but the continent contributes less than 2% of the global research output. There are many reasons for this that I'm not going to get into, but joining a network like this is eventually one way to offer your contribution, but really also achieve your academic goals if you are interested in your research. So look for the Join AfriSNet menu on our website, register, join the network, and you will not regret it, I promise. Okay, so now about the AfriSNet's graduate information sessions. What we want to do is to present general information pertaining specifically to research-centered graduate school education and graduate school application. So this general information is going to be presented today in February, and the goal is that we keep this going every year. And then in the second webinar, we're going to talk about the actual AfriSNet mentorship program. And that's when we'll really dig deeper into the application process and what it takes, what it entails, what you have to do when you need to do it, and what you can be doing now to really get ready for the application later this year. So be on the lookout for our second webinar, which will be on February 18th. So that's next Saturday. We're going to have a discussion at the end to choose a time that is hopefully better for most of you. We also want to listen to you and answer your questions about graduate school in general. And of course, we are hoping that we can help you make an informed decision about your graduate school endeavors. I want to recognize these two people and really thank them a lot for their efforts and commitment. Nuti Fafa, as I already mentioned, is the chair of our education committee, a PhD student at the University of Alabama. And Peter is the vice chair of the education committee, and is currently a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania. He's an alumnus also of our summer research internship programs, as well as our graduate application mentorship programs. And so for today's presentation specifically, I really want to try and answer the question of what is graduate school? It is, and the hope is that as we get to that, you also start thinking, is this really right for me? And start aligning your goals and current activities towards that goal. As I present this, I'm going to try and do a comparative exploration, particularly comparing to the undergraduate training, which you are all either into already or have completed, but most of people on this call, I would assume, are familiar with the undergraduate training. I will then focus really on research-based graduate education in the United States, and then we will open it up for discussion and questions. And so next Saturday, we're going to break down the graduate school application process in detail. Okay, we're going to discuss again in more details what you could be doing now to increase your graduate school admission chances. For people who are joining now, if you could please mute your microphone, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And we're going again to explain what AfriSnet can do for you to guide you through the application process. But just to already give you heads ups, if you are qualified, AfriSnet is going to provide you individual mentorship. You will be paired with a mentor who will be dedicated to you to guide you through the application process. And of course, we'll also have time to discuss and answer your questions. So what is graduate school? I would define it as an academic entity that awards postgraduate degrees, be it a master's or a doctorate. So an example, what you see on this picture to the right is the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences, which is a division at UT Southwestern Medical Center, where I am doing research now. So UT Southwestern Medical Center is really a world-renowned, world-class research and academic center. And they, within that really large organization, is this graduate school that focuses on biomedical sciences and has many other subdivisions, as you could imagine. So, for example, this is microbiology shown on this picture here. But graduate students within this school are involved in a whole range of research areas, ranging from computer science to cancer biology, microbiology, and even some clinical research and basic science research. And so this is important for you to know. If you are in Ethiopia and you're thinking about going to graduate school at Stanford University, it's important to understand that Stanford is a huge university, and that would be the case for most universities in the United States, that has a lot of departments or colleges or schools. And each one of these departments or college or school may have a number of graduate programs that focus on specific research disciplines. And so it's important to understand that and be able to navigate that really complex system and place your research interest in the people that you would want to do research with. As time goes on from now, and if you are enrolled in our mentorship program, the goal is that we also guide you through that landscape, so you're able to define your interest and really find a good match for graduate school. Graduate school in general, graduate education would prepare you for teaching or expert leadership, be it in public or private sectors. And so when you go to graduate school, typically you're trying to become an expert in a specific and narrower field. So you can then use your skill set or your knowledge to teach or lead the society in many different ways. And so if you take a minute and think back about your respective universities, for example, you will find out that most people in the leadership positions, so the vice chancellors or the presidents of your universities might all be doctors, so PhD holders in different areas. And so now I'm going to do a brief comparison between undergraduate and graduate school. And I think this is a good way to help you, if you're not aware already, really understand what graduate school is about in a little more detail. Just a disclaimer here, for the interest of time, I'm not going to elaborate on a lot of the things I present here. And of course, my lists are not exhaustive. If any of you in the meeting feels like I missed something important, please bring it up in the discussion at the end. That goes especially for Nutifafa and John. And so as an undergraduate student, what you are doing or what you have done is to acquire general and broad knowledge that is pertaining to a chosen discipline. And so you might have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering or chemistry or computer science. If, for example, your major is chemistry, you may also take other general courses in history, for example, or politics, or religion, or social sciences. But even the chemistry courses you take are really wide and broad. You may cover topics in analytical chemistry all the way to organic chemistry, biochemistry, physical chemistry, and what have you. For graduate school, again, you really choose a specific area to focus on within a broad discipline. And so within civil engineering, a PhD student might focus only on pavement engineering. Within chemistry, a PhD program or a PhD research project may, for example, focus on lithium batteries only, right? Or oil refining or petroleum engineering. And in computer science, for example, PhD research project may focus on artificial intelligence, as an example. So as an undergraduate student, usually what we are trying to get through the bachelor's training is to acquire sufficient knowledge for professional practice. And so you, for example, want to become a civil engineer and work for your city, right, in your local area, or start your own business as an entrepreneur in civil engineering, right? But typically you want to move directly into practice, get a job or start a career. This is also true for some doctorate degrees, if not really most of them. So for example, a medical doctor may not do extensive research. Instead, they acquire knowledge, practical knowledge, to become a doctor and treat patients. But what really distinguishes graduate school from undergraduate education, especially research-based graduate programs, is this idea of building on existing knowledge to generate new knowledge. And so you're not just acquiring new information, you're really working to actually generate new knowledge. So in terms of the enrollment requirements, these two study stages also differ. So to get into undergraduate, you most likely would need to have a high school degree. For graduate school, you need an undergraduate degree. Although I want to clarify something here already, and I'm gonna point to it again later in the presentation. You don't need to have your degree in order to apply for graduate school in the United States. I believe it's the same in Europe, and in some programs in China. It might be the case in Australia as well. It's definitely the case in Canada as well. You can apply before you complete your undergraduate, but your undergraduate degree must be conferred before you can start graduate school. There are some standard tests that are required in some countries to enroll into an undergraduate program that is the same for graduate school. Again, in some countries, and this is going to vary from program to program, from country to country. So you may also be required to submit recommendation letters. So these are statements from people who know you academically as a student that can speak to your ability, to your capacity to succeed in the program in which you're trying to get into. So when you start an undergraduate program, in most countries, you really don't need to know what you're going to study. Some people come and explore a range of programs before they commit to a specific major. I know colleagues in my undergraduate studies who started as biology majors and graduated in business. Or they started as biology majors and graduated in English or history or vice versa. As for graduate school, you really typically enroll in a specific program. You don't really, you may rotate in a few labs, we'll see, but you enroll in one program, and that's usually where you graduate from. If you leave that program, means you leave it and enroll in a different one. But you can't really keep changing within the same program. That makes sense. Undergraduate, most likely you will have to pay tuition unless you have a full scholarship or partial scholarship. Whereas as we will see today, and especially next Saturday, research-based graduate programs, especially in the sciences here in the United States, really in most STEM areas, you do not need to pay tuition. So that's very important. And I know some students in Africa do not know this, so I want to emphasize this. If you come to graduate school here in the United States, in most STEM fields, you will not have to pay tuition. So neither I or Notifafa or Jan have had to pay tuition for our graduate school training. So the tuition was waived. So the these two stages also vary in how long they take eventually. Undergraduate can be anywhere between 3 to 5 years, depending on the country. As a graduate can go anywhere between 1 to 6 years, sometimes even longer than that, depending on whether you're doing a master's or a PhD, and of course, how and when you enroll in the program. So if you start a PhD with a master's, for example, it may make your PhD shorter. And so the undergraduate and graduate also differ in the way the instruction is set up, but also in the advisorship that you receive as a student, as well as in the responsibilities that you have as a student. So undergraduates typically tend to be in large classes. Some introductory courses, at least here in the United States, the system that I'm more familiar with, you may have classes that have up to 300 or more students, right? So it's pretty large lecture halls. Graduate schools, eventually you tend to have much smaller classes. So you'd have one professor in undergraduate who is teaching, many students, 300, 200 students. Whereas if for graduate school, you typically have one student who is being mentored by one or a few advisors. So some students will actually have more than one graduate advisors. You have a defined list of courses that you have to complete in order to be awarded the degree. This is also the case for graduate school, but typically you take fewer courses in graduate school and instead focus on research projects. This may be different also depending on the graduate school that you are in. Just keep in mind as I present that I'm really focusing on the research-based graduate programs. It might be the case that if you go to, for example, law school or medical school, you may have to take a lot of courses. And so undergraduate, you may not have to do research at all, but most programs nowadays will require a senior project of some kind. This is typically an exercise where you get to apply your theoretical knowledge that you've learned throughout your undergraduate to solve a specific problem within a given discipline, within a given context. This can be a research project. It can be a thesis, reading thesis project. It can be the development of a product like a computer app for a telephone app, for example, or something like that. As for a research-based graduate program, you will really delve into a research project that you have to complete, conduct to the end, of course, with the support of your advisors. As a graduate student, you also get training in teaching and obviously research. Some of you may also have been TAs as undergraduate student, but it's not the case for every student who is an undergraduate student. But most PhD programs, for example, will require the students to at least have one semester where they have to teach. And that's, of course, to train them also as teachers. So a graduate student is going to have to be self-organized as opposed to an undergraduate student. And what I mean here is that if you have to take an undergraduate class, typically there is a specific time for that class, and you have to be in class at that given time if you want to take that course, right? But if I have to run an experiment in the lab as a graduate student, most of the time, nobody is really going to tell me when I have to do that experiment. I can start the experiment at 8 a.m. and finish it at 8 a.m. the next day, or finish it within a few hours, depending on the experiment. I've seen colleagues as a PhD student who preferred getting in the lab at 6 a.m. and leave at 4 p.m. But I also know colleagues who would get in the lab at 1 p.m. and stay until 8 or 9 p.m. in the night, depending on their lifestyle and where they see their most productive hours in the day. So it's really a self-organized undertaking. And you organize yourself in a way that maximizes your capacity and of course makes your life easier. Okay, so now let's focus on the research-based graduate school in the United States. And so I want to also reiterate here that the American system is really similar to the Canadian system. It has a lot of similarities with the European system, the Australian system, and the Asian system. For example, the Chinese system is aligning itself much more to the American system nowadays. And so the information we provide here is really relevant if you are planning to go to graduate school somewhere else that is not in the United States. So there are a lot of graduate research programs in the United States, over 1,000 in just one country. That's a lot. And these are universities, okay? Every university could very well have tens or hundreds of graduate programs. And so it's vast. And as I mentioned earlier, I can't emphasize this enough. If you are admitted into a research-based graduate program in the United States, especially in STEM fields, the tuition will be waived. You will not have to pay a dime for tuition. And in addition, you will most likely receive some sort of monetary stipend every month to help with living expenses. So think about it as being paid to go to school, right? How awesome is that? And I know China is doing this, for example, a lot nowadays. Some programs in Europe do the same. Programs in Canada do the same. So again, I assume programs in Australia also do the same. But again, here we're focusing on the United States but the information is relevant somewhere else. And there might be tuition waivers and stipends for master's degrees, but these tend to be very limited and also available on a case-by-case system. And so for PhD programs, for example, you will really find some programs that make it very clear on their website that if you are admitted in our program, your tuition will be waived and we are going to pay you $30,000 a year in stipend, or $40,000 a year, or $50,000 a year, depending on the city where you're living, because the living expenses vary across the US. So it may take more to live in San Francisco, for example, compared to Bloomington, Indiana, where I did my PhD. So PhD students in San Francisco are paid more than PhD students in the Midwest of the United States, for example, or states like Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, or the South part of the United States. If you are not in STEM and you joined this call just to learn about graduate school in general, there might be scholarships and financial support in those areas as well. But again, this is a case-by-case system, and you would have to dig much deeper into a specific program to see what scholarships they have available. Admission into PhD programs does not require a master's degree. This is important to know. This is contrary to many programs in Europe that may require you to have a master's degree before you can enroll into a PhD program. For example, I do not have a master's program. I mean, a master's degree. So I completed my undergraduate studies and moved on to the PhD right away. And this is the case for many of my friends here who did not have to have a master's to start their PhDs. So if you're thinking that you need to get your master's first before you can apply for your PhD, that's not correct. If you feel like you need a master's to gain more research experience, that is, of course, a noble way of thinking about it. But if you already have research experience, there is no need to wait for a master's, especially since how long your PhD will take will really depend on the nature of your research project, not necessarily having a master's, because the courses you take in your master's might be transferable to your PhD program. And so you may take courses for a shorter period of time, but your research is not going to be transferable to your PhD project. You may have gained research skills eventually that will help. But as you will all learn very quickly when you start your research, how fast you move on a research project depends on a lot of factors, including the research project itself. And if you are trying to get a master's first, also keep in mind that tuition waivers and monetary stipends are not really widely available for masters. And so in the US, a master's is going to take anywhere from 1 to 3 years. So a doctorate can take anywhere between 4 to 6 or 7 years. And again, depending on a number of factors, including the research project, how the PhD program itself is set up, and so forth. And so if you are thinking about applying to graduate school in the United States, you would submit your applications in November or December this year if you want to start next year. And this is an yearly system. So applications are due typically in the fall or early winter for the next academic year. And a lot of programs have their application deadline on December 1st. Some master's program may have a rolling admission system. What that means is that whenever you submit your application, you're going to consider it, okay? And And so the academic year in the United States, if you are in a country that has a different system, it runs from August to May. And as I already mentioned, if you would like to start graduate school next year, that is in 2024, you would have to apply later this year, okay? And so why come to the United States? I personally think, and most people would agree with me that the US has really distinguished itself in research globally. We've established a very obvious leadership in research across the globe. And that is not just in the number of universities or research programs that I talked about earlier, but also the amount or the level of investment that is dedicated to research is just mind-blowing. So for example, in 2019 alone, the country invested over $600 billion in research. I don't have the statistics here, but this is well beyond China, for example, which would be second to the United States. And so if you're a PhD student here or a master's student, you would also work with really globally renowned research faculty. I've given you an example here, just picking the Nobel Prizes in physics since 1901, over 96 of those have come to the United States. And the second country, Germany, that's about a 70, close to 70 difference between the two countries, right? This is just physics, but even if you pick all the Nobel Prizes together, I believe the United States has well over 380 Nobel Prize laureates, and I think the number might be much higher than the one I'm saying here. And that's just the Nobel Prize, but we can look at many other accolades that make researchers globally influential. And this would be obvious if any of you tries to dig into any research database and see where the published research is coming from, for example. But even if you're working with a researcher who is not necessarily globally renowned, they've been trained most likely in a very competent program, either in the United States or somewhere else in the world. You will still really gain really good research training. So you would also be able to take advantage of a really cutting edge research technology and infrastructure. So for example, on this picture in the background to the left, what you are seeing are three AFISNet interns from MOI who came to Indiana University in the summer of 2019. And here they are being introduced to this equipment that you see in the back. This is a microscope, also known as Delta Vision or MX. It's a really cutting edge technology that does imaging, also known as super resolution microscopy. And so for the nerds in the room, this imaging technique, you could really say that it beats the laws of physics because it can image objects at a resolution that is actually lower than the wavelength of light, using tricks of physics and mathematics and computer engineering. Okay, and so as a PhD student at Indiana University, I used this microscope a lot for my own research. And I would say that there aren't many places in the world where I would have been able to have access to a microscope like this really anytime that I needed it. There is a vast range of research disciplines, as you can imagine, in a country that has more than 1,000 research universities, right? But what I also really like about the United States is a culture that is less hierarchical compared to other places in the world, especially in Eastern cultures. And so just to give you an example, when I started my PhD, I would knock on the Jean-Pierre, would you mind muting yourself, please? Thank you. Sorry about that. I would knock on the office door of my PhD advisor and be like, "Hi, Dr. Lacefield." And she would look at me and say, "Gabriel, you can call me Sonny." Sonny is her first name. It took me a while, coming from the African culture to call a professor, let alone my PhD advisor, by her first name. Eventually, I became comfortable enough with her that I would call her by her first name. But that really changes how you interact with her, right? And you do the same with all the research faculty on the campus or in the research community. You do the same with the dean or the president of the university, right? I could meet the dean of research in the whole campus and be like, "Hey, David," or "Hey, Brian," right? And immediately that really fosters collegiality. It fosters a rich exchange that is not hindered by hierarchy. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. Also very important, because of the global leadership of the United States, these graduate programs here have attracted a really, really large and vibrant international research community. And so you have researchers here in the United States who come from all over the world: India, China, Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, myself, Taiwan, Japan, European countries, France, UK, you name it, right? In fact, it might very well be true that you can find all nationalities in the research enterprise in the United States, right? And so you benefit a lot from that as a PhD student. So yes, to the benefits. I'm only naming a few here. There is a lot. Obviously, if you are in a globally renowned university, the degree you get will be respected globally. You get top-notch research training from really competent advisors and top-notch research equipment and technology. Right? This means that you are able to do really, really frontier, really cutting-edge research, which eventually would lead to impactful publications. I'm assuming that everybody on the call knows what a publication is. If not, please ask in the questions and we can tell you more. There is, in addition to the research universities in the United States, there are also a lot of international research societies or science societies that have their headquarters here in the United States. And they usually organize meetings every year where you get to meet and interact with researchers from all over the world. And so, for example, I am a member of the American Society for Cell Biology, which teams up with the European Molecular Biology Organization, or EMBO. And every year they organize a meeting where thousands, literally thousands of researchers in cell biology and beyond come together in one city in the United States for a research conference. And so when I attended this meeting in Washington, DC in December last year, I met people from Europe, people from Africa, people from Ghana, for example, that I was able to interact with. But you also meet people in your own research field that you can share ideas with and maybe even collaborate with in your research. So as such, you really very quickly become integrated into the global research community. And this is very important and beneficial towards your research success, right? With all this in your pocket, of course, you increase your job security, be it in private or public sectors, and I would say really anywhere in the world. So at the end of my PhD, I was looking for a postdoctoral position, and my exploration was very wide. My mind was open globally. I looked at programs in Switzerland, programs in the UK, programs in Canada, even programs in Japan. And so with a degree from the US, it's very well possible that you can get a position anywhere in the world. And of course, that's true if you have a degree from other countries as well. But you know, the US stands out for many reasons that I've alluded to in this presentation. So now you might be asking yourself, how do I get in? So I'm gonna talk about that a little bit. And then I will conclude the presentation by sort of doing a retrospective on my own journey and my own research. So you need an undergraduate degree to be admitted into a graduate program in the US. I've already mentioned this. You must have a good grade point average. We run into students every year who are really committed, but oftentimes their grade point average or the so-called GPA is a little bit low, and this can be a problem. And so if you are still in your second year or in your third year, or you still have a chance to increase your grade point average and you are thinking about going to graduate school, please work hard to keep your GPA high or increase it. This is generally a cutoff of 3 or above, and this is on a scale of 4. You may have the scale of 5 or the scale of 100. Do not worry. That can be translated back into the American system. And most graduate program admission committees may not even require you to translate your grade. They will just look at it for what it is. It's important, though, to indicate in your CV or some transcripts will also say that what your grade means, okay? So you may look at 3/4 and say, well, that's, you know, a little bit less than 75%. And I have, you know, 65%, so I'm doomed, right? Well, you may have 65% now when the top student in your program has 75. And so you have to place yourself on that scale and explain what your performance means in your class, okay? So you need some research experience. This is very, very important. And please come back next Saturday because we are going to take enough time to explain this and what you can start doing now to gain some research experience, okay? AfriSNet helps somewhat through the research internships, but that program is still very limited. We are only able to recruit actually less than 10 students every year. I'm hoping the program will grow, but there is a lot you can do where you are now to gain some research experience. The goal here is for you to have some familiarity with laboratory research. And so you might have taken some practical courses or you have a senior project that you're working on. We can discuss in more details about how you can sort of tailor that or direct that in a way that will actually speak to the graduate admission committees here in the United States. If you are not coming from an English-speaking country, you may need to demonstrate your English proficiency. This is typically done by taking English tests. There is two common ones. They're so-called TOEFL, or Test of English as a Foreign Language, or IELTS. Most programs will accept scores for either tests. This is a hard requirement. If the university has it in place, chances are you cannot have it waived if you're not from an English-speaking country. So if you are in West Africa, for example, countries like Benin or Cameroon, I think Cameroon might be bilingual, Togo, Mali, countries that Burkina Faso that are mainly, or DRCs, countries that are mainly French-speaking, and they have the education system in French, this is a good time to start thinking about the TOEFL and preparing for it. If any of you needs a preparation material for the TOEFL, please reach out to me. I might have some documents that I can share with you. You may also need to take the graduate record exam, the so-called GRE. This is a test that really, in a succinct way, test your reading and writing skills as well as your basic math skills. Scores of this test have not necessarily reflected the capacity or the performance of graduate students. And so most graduate programs are actually waiving the GRE. Something that I think is going to be helpful to many African students, because it's going to help because these tests, of course, are expensive. You have to pay to take them. And so I already sort of mentioned this, but keep in mind that you can apply before completing your undergraduate. However, the undergraduate degree must be conferred
Gabriel, hold on. Okay. All right.
Okay, if you're coming in, please mute yourself so we don't disturb the meeting for others. As I was saying that you can submit your application to graduate school before you complete your bachelor's studies, but you must have your degree conferred before you start graduate school. And so when I applied, for example, I completed my undergraduate in May 2013. But I actually had my PhD admissions already by February or March of that year. That means I applied in the fall of 2012 before I actually had completed undergraduate studies. So you may also have to pay an application fee, but a lot of programs, if you can provide them with a financial statement, they will waive that application. And don't let this be what limits you from applying. These fees are usually not very high. So the actual material that you actually submit, there is not a lot, right? So you obviously need your undergraduate transcript. They may ask for the current transcript when you apply, but then require you to submit the final transcript once you've enrolled and once you graduate from your undergraduate or your master's, right? Same thing. You must, of course, have the slips of your English proficiency and standard test submitted to the university. Some universities will take official or unofficial transcripts that will vary from school to school. And when you take this standard test, most of the time, your scores are transferred directly to the university. This is something that I wish would change, because in addition to paying to the test, you have to pay a certain fee for your scores to be transferred to every university you apply to. And I just wish universities would just take a copy of your research slips if it's been mailed to you or provided to you electronically somehow. And I want to say that I think maybe there are programs already who do that, who don't have to have your scores transferred from the test providers. And so you also need to write some sort of personal statement or statement of purpose. In some programs, it might be specifically a research statement. But in general, what these documents are, they're really a synopsis of who you are as a student, as a person, as a researcher, and also about your future. So what you hope to achieve through graduate school, why you think you are qualified for graduate school, and how you think the program you're applying to is going to impact your future academic or research goals. Once again, if you are qualified and become mentored by AfriSNet, we help you, we give you more information on how to write these documents, and your mentors are going to help proofread these documents for you. And of course, you might be required to submit your curriculum vitae. Once you are admitted, generally you receive the I-20 document or equivalent. This is the document that you take to the embassy to apply for a visa. And then you apply, get a visa, and travel to the US. In most cases, in fact, I would say I am yet to hear somebody who was offered from Africa, who was offered an admission to a PhD or a master's program and was refused a visa by the embassy. So the US is, I think, committed to training a really vibrant international research community. And I think that's displayed in the fact that typically, if you have an admission to an accredited, well-known university, you will be issued a visa. But of course, I don't work for the US Embassy. That's not a guarantee I'm giving here. So if you apply and get a different response, what I'm saying is that all the people I know who have applied and gotten admissions that AfriSNet has mentored have been issued visas. You need to find housing in the city where you're going to school, and of course, open a US bank account so you can receive your stipend. Typically, the first year or the first semester, you rotate through a number of labs before you commit to your thesis lab and your thesis research project. So you work for a few weeks or a few months in different labs. And the idea is that you sort of get a feel for what your performance would be in that lab based on your interaction with the research, the principal investigator or the leader of the lab and other people in the lab. I'll also get a feel for the actual research projects that are available in that lab. This is also a good, really awesome way to explore new research areas that you may not even have thought about, right? And so when I started my PhD, I rotated in a lab that was doing research using Drosophila melanogaster as a research model. I also then rotated in a lab that was using mammalian and human cells to study cancer. But I ended up joining a laboratory that, as I will come back to in a minute, that was doing research using budding yeast as a model system. All the labs were focusing on cell division and cell cycle. but using different research model systems and approaching their research questions in a little bit different ways. And it was really, really good for me to have that chance to explore the 3 different labs before I actually commit to one of them. After you're done with your rotations, hopefully you select your thesis lab where you're going to do your master's, your PhD. I doubt that master's programs offer rotations. Don't quote me on that. Maybe some of them do. I'm not sure. But typically for PhD programs, you get to rotate through a number of labs before you choose your thesis lab. So what would you actually do as a graduate student in a research-based graduate program, right? You still have to take some courses, as I mentioned earlier, few courses compared to undergraduate, but you still have a few. And depending on whether you have a master's or not and which courses you've taken before, you may have to take classes for 1 to 3 years. And then you, of course, do your research. And this means you read a lot. Read and read and read. You can't really read enough. I can't overstate that. You run experiments in the lab for your research project. You present research to your lab members. And so most research laboratories will have what people usually call lab meetings, where one member of the lab comes, or maybe a few members of the lab. There's different setups for different labs. The idea is that you present your research project to other members of the lab, and then you get feedback from them on your presentation and also on your research. And so you may also have to present to the department or at a research conference, for example. So it goes way beyond your laboratory. You most likely will have to teach because, again, the PhD training, sometimes even as a master's student, you're also being trained to become a teacher or to teach in the future if you want to. And of course, you have life outside the lab, right? We have families, some of us have kids, and you have to factor that into your schedule, your life as well. And so how do you find and conduct your research project as a PhD student? There is a number of ways, and this varies from laboratory to laboratory. There are programs or cases where the student has really invested in a specific laboratory. For example, they've done internship for a very long time, or they've worked as an undergraduate researcher in a laboratory for a very long time. If you are in Africa now, that may not be the case for you, for example, but I know there might be people on this call who are also already undergraduate students in the United States who might be working in a lab for a long time, and they just know exactly which project they want to work on for their PhD, and they join the lab and start working on that project. Keep in mind that even if you know exactly what you want to work on, rotations might be mandatory. So you may still be required to rotate. In fact, chances are you will most likely be required to rotate still. But in that case, regardless, you have your project in mind, and once you join your thesis lab, you dive into it and start your project. In some cases, like my case, the principal investigator may present to you, the principal investigator here is the leader of the lab. And so this is your PhD advisor. We also call them PI here in the United States. They may present to you a list of possible research projects for you to choose from. And you may right away like one project and get going with it, or you could take a few months to explore different projects. So do some experiments or review the literature that's pertaining to each one of the projects that were presented to you. And before you can actually commit to a specific project. Regardless of how you chose it, the expectation for your research project is that you are responsible for designing the experiments. You run the experiments, you analyze the results that you get, and you prepare the results for publication. All of this, of course, with the support of your advisor, as well as other lab members. And as I said earlier, you might also be collaborating with other people in the wider research community who are helping with your research. And so, for example, in my current research project, I'm not a PhD student anymore, but a lot of PhD students would do similar things. I am collaborating with other researchers outside UT Southwestern Medical Center who are here in the United States, and that's very common. And so for my PhD thesis project, for example, which was at this really beautiful campus at Indiana University in Bloomington, in this picture here shown to the left, my project was about investigating how cells coordinate their shape with division. So in other words, if any of you has learned mitosis, you learned that a cell divides and gives birth to two daughter cells that are genetically identical, right? So there is that word genetic, right? And so there's been sort of a focus on the DNA, the genetic material of the cell, right? Chromosomes have to segregate equationally, right? For my research project, I really wanted to understand, it's not just the DNA, it's also sort of the makeup, the outside, the shape, the cytoskeleton of the cell has to also be preserved. And so how do cells do that? Okay. And so as I mentioned, I was using budding yeast as a model. I'm not going to give you a research presentation that would take hours, do not worry. Just to give you a quick glimpse, and I really hope that you can all see this movie play. What I'm showing here to the in the middle is a budding yeast that is dividing in mitosis. And I acquired this video using what's called fluorescence live microscopy. And the colors you're seeing are tagging specific proteins in the cells that I wanted to look at as the cells divide. Notice how this cell gives birth to a daughter cell that looks exactly the same as the mother cell in shape, right? And then division continues, right? If I genetically modify the same cells, now pay attention to the daughter cells that form here will have, in this case, they had an abnormal shape, okay? And so in this very specific type of division that I was working on, which is also known as return to mitosis in budding yeast, I identified a cohort of genes that were important for the cells to preserve their shape as they are dividing in this mitotic division. Notice also that this cell ended up with two nuclei, right? I love these movies. Let me play it one more time. And so this is also an example where I really had access to really nice microscopes and research tools for me to be able to acquire videos like this in my research, right? And eventually, not to brag or anything, or not to say that my research is the best in the world, it is not by any means. But this research resulted into a publication in Journal of Cell Biology in 2019. So this is one of the benefits that I told you, that if you're doing research as a PhD student, you are able to publish and contribute to existing knowledge by generating novel knowledge through your research. And so this is a specific example that I wanted to show you from my PhD thesis. Okay. Now, because I had a PhD, I could apply to postdoctoral positions. And I was fortunate enough to receive an offer from Dr. Gaudens Danusser who has a laboratory at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. So that's where I am now. And I'm showing you here a picture of the some of the buildings at UT Southwestern campus in Dallas. Here to the left and to the right, again, is another movie that I acquired using microscopes that are even much more advanced than the ones I used in my PhD. And what I'm trying to understand now, or what my research is about, is to understand how cell shape affects cancer development. And so this has been fun for me. I've been interested in science. I've been interested in research since I was an undergraduate student. And I'm really happy that I've been able to go through a PhD and also move on to the postdoc phase that I'm doing now. So really my message to you today, this is my PhD advisor, Dr. Sonny Lacefield, when she was holding me at the PhD graduation ceremony. And what I want to tell you is that I'm an African like you. I understand the struggles that you have now because I went through the same struggles. But I kept pushing. I kept looking for opportunities to do research. And I know many other Africans who have done the same thing. They kept pushing. And if we have done it, what I'm telling you today, where you are sitting, is that you can also do it. I'm also saying that we are here to help when you are ready. So just keep in touch with us. Keep up with AfriSNet to learn more. And please do join us for the Graduate Information Session 2, which will be held next Saturday on February 18th. We're going to open it up to the discussion. And one of the things that we want to learn from you is if we can maybe change the time and move it to 1 hour earlier, because I know people from Ethiopia, for example, or Nairobi may have had to join us at 7 p.m. their local time. So the question is, would it help if we moved 1 hour earlier? And then how would that work for people who are in Ghana, for example, who were still at 4 p.m. their local time? Or for Nutifafa and John, who are at we're at 10 a.m. Here in the US. So again, thank you so much for your attention. I am going to stop sharing now and open it up to the discussion.
All right. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for such an elaborate presentation. I guess everyone learned something from today's presentation, and I just want to open the floor for any questions. If Gabriel said something during his presentation that you needed more clarification on, you could just send it on a chat or unmute yourself and just ask the question. Emmanuel, yes, you have access to the recording.
Yes,
we'll send it to you. So, all right. Rachel has a question. Her hands are up. Do you mind unmuting yourself, Rachel, to ask your question?
Thank you so much. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes, Rachel, maybe tell us where you are as well. I know you may have put it in the chat already, but just say it again for other people on the call. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, my name is Rachel. I'm from Nigeria, currently in Nigeria. So, but I'm hoping to do my PhD outside the country as well. Okay, so my question is, but before then, let me just appreciate you for this training. It's very worthwhile. In fact, I'm so grateful for joining. It's a whole lot to me. Well, one of the questions I want to ask is, when you do your presentation, you said that PhD deals with specific program on like undergraduate program that you have to pick a course, maybe for instance, undergraduate is computer science, why PhD, you do PhD in maybe artificial intelligence. Now, my question is, my research interest is interdisciplinary. That means it's not only focusing on computer science. I'm a computer science student. My research interest is human-computer interaction. Now, I've tried to make my research. I noticed that human-computer interaction is an interdisciplinary research, of which it can be done in psychology, computer, and other areas, depending on the area you're focusing. Now, if I'm going to be applying for PhD, if that human computer interaction is not being done in computer science, still apply for PhD in for that human computer interaction, considering the fact that it is not in computer science as my course, but it's in another department entirely. So will I still be recognized as a PhD in computer science focusing in HCI, or I'll have to change my field then? I mean, my course entirely. That's a question I want to ask. Number two, please. When you were trying to make mention of the requirement for graduate school to supervisor, are you saying that it's not needed for you to send a mail to supervisor first before you start your application? Please, I'll need clarification on that, please. Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you, Rachel. Your first question is a really, really good question. But let me make sure before I answer the first one that I got the second one, because your voice got cut a little bit. So for the second question, and if I got it right, just type yes in the chat. You're asking me to elaborate a little bit on what I said, that you don't need to have your degree completed, your undergraduate degree completed or master's degree completed before you apply for a PhD program. Or are you asking if you need to select a specific advisor before you apply? I'm happy to talk about both. And if that's the case, please put yes in the chat as I answer your first question. So as a computer scientist, it makes total sense that your research is interdisciplinary in nature. And for example, I am a cell biologist by training. My PhD was in cell biology, but I'm actually now in a bioinformatics department at UT Southwestern Medical Center. So why? Rachel, exactly because my research is interdisciplinary in nature, right? And so I want to understand cancer cells from I need the computational tools to really be able to segment the shape, for example, of cancer cells, and also understand them from a biophysical point of view, if you will. And so you don't have to change from computer science to something else. But what you need to do is to search for graduate programs. So for example, a bioinformatics or an informatics or a computer science department that has laboratories that are doing research in your area of interest. And so the goal is that you would join that department and apply your computer science knowledge and skills towards a specific research question that might be coming from a different research area. And it's very true that nowadays research is becoming much more interdisciplinary. And so if you take the computer scientist out of my research projects, I cannot complete my research project as I want it to be completed. And so I help them, they help me. So we work together that way. And they develop computational tools as part of their PhD or postdoctoral research projects, that then I apply to my research as a biologist. So for your second question, it's yes, you don't need to have your undergraduate degree or master's degree before you submit your applications to a PhD program. But as I mentioned, before you start graduate school, you must have your master's or undergraduate degree conferred. So you have to complete whichever prior degree you're in. If you are asking also if you need to have your PhD advisor already selected, that is the case for some PhD programs. You are admitted through a specific advisor. And if that's the case, the program will make it clear on their website or through their application pages. But in most cases, what you want to do, and this is what AfriSnet encourages everyone to do, is to reach out to not just one faculty, but a number of professors at any given university who are doing research that interests you. And the reason why it's important to do that is usually these professors may enter into a conversation with you either via email or through a Zoom call and start telling you about their university and graduate programs. So the number one benefit is that you get to know more, not just about the research that the professor is doing, but also about their university. You also then kind of get an advocate at that university and in that graduate program. Somebody who can say, yes, I've spoken with this student, I know them, they are good, okay? And so if you have questions also on how to find or communicate with research professors in your area of interest, and this goes beyond Rachel, this goes to everyone else, please reach out to us and we can help you or show you how to do that. I hope I've answered your questions, Rachel. And
I would want to add something to what you just said. So when it comes to contacting professors in a school, I would advise from this actually from an experience, someone else's experience. So when you're contacting professors in a given school, you need to make sure the expertise or the field of the professors are a little bit similar, because if they are very diverse, you know, professors kind of speak amongst themselves. And if maybe you're applying to a professor who is doing something entirely different from the next professor, they might think you don't know what you want, or you don't know what your interest really lies. Because if you apply to Professor A and say, oh, okay, I find your work intriguing, I want to work in your lab. You go to the next professor who is doing something divergent from the first professor and say, oh, I find your work intriguing, I want to work in your lab. And you change your interest pertaining to that professor. What I'm just trying to say is your interest must be consistent, especially in a given school, in one school. If the interest varies in another school, that's different. But if you're applying to, let's say, Indiana, and you're contacting 3 or 4 professors in the lab, in the school, they need to have at least a similarity in their interest, or should I say your interest should be consistent across board, so that they, in case they get to converse amongst themselves and speak about a student who contacted them, they would know that, okay, this student actually has a similar interest and knows what they want. Because that was a case for a friend who wasn't able to get into the school because the professors felt that he did not know what he really wanted, and that they kind of disqualified him. So that's actually what I want to put out there. I don't know whether you get it.
Yeah, thank you so much. The question is well answered. Thank you.
All right, great. So we have some questions in the chat box, which I would read out. So there's one question from AJ Francis, who says, please, I have a question, even though this forum was not about undergraduate studies overseas, but can a 25-year-old person be admitted for undergraduate studies with funding? And this Francis from Ghana. Gabriel, do you want to? Should I?
I mean, I think, can you get admitted? Yes. People who are 70 get admitted into undergraduate or graduate programs. So I don't think the age is the problem. What I would say might be the problem is funding. So funding for undergraduate studies is very, very rare, especially for international students. You would have to be exceptional. I mean, once in 80 years or so, you will hear one student from an African country who gets admission into Harvard and Stanford and what have you, or these Ivy League schools with you know, a lot of dollars in scholarship, but that is rare. So that's what I would say. It doesn't mean you can't try. There might be scholarships that we are not aware of, but in general, you have to pay. One of the major requirements for admission into undergraduate here is actually proof of financial capacity to pay tuition.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. And one thing I would also want to add to it is that when it comes to funding for undergraduate studies, as Gabriel rightfully said, it's really slim. However, there are other external funding agencies that are available, but they're also kind of very few. So we have something called the MasterCard Foundation, if you've not heard of it, that also supports African students to study both in Africa and also outside the country. So if you want to enroll in something like that, I would suggest you kind of go in for other external agencies that support either maybe female students. There's some agencies that are dedicated to supporting women in STEM who want to pursue education outside the country. There are also other scholarships that are out there, but they are actually very slim as compared to the graduate studies. So that's something I would also want to add up to what Gabriel said. The next question we have here is, hello, is it possible to start application after February to start graduate program next year? And also, is it possible to apply without English proficiency slips? This from Melat.
I mean, I can speak to the English proficiency, but John, would you advise somebody to apply now? Or I mean, I'm not even sure if the application portals are open. But
I suspect they're probably closed. I mean,
yeah.
Just to reiterate, graduate schools generally start in the fall of a given year, so August or September. The applications are always going to be due generally the December previous. So like, for example, this year, applications would have been due on December 1st, 2022. And that is for admission into graduate school in, say, September of 2023. So, I mean, once you pass that deadline, you really can't apply to graduate school for that year. You sort of have to wait for the next year. Now you can start preparing for next year's applications, for the applications that would be due in December of 2023 for admittance in, say, August or September of 2024. So those are sort of your sort of dates. You can sort of start whenever you want, but you need to have your application submitted in early December, and then you would eventually start a few months later in the fall of the next year.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to apply now. What you need to do is preparing your application material that we talked about, right? Do you have research experience? How can you get some laboratory research experience now, right? And think about who is going to write your recommendation letters. Most programs are going to require, 2 to 3 recommendation letters. And so do you need your English proficiency proof to apply? I believe you can apply without it, at least in some programs, but you will not be admitted until you show proof, if that proof is required. And so again, if the deadline is December 1st, we advise you to try and take that test before December 1st. And if possible, have the results in before that deadline. That would be ideal. Most scores for these standard tests are valid for a number of years. So even if you took the TOEFL, so for example, last year, it might still be good for your application this year or even a few years down the road.
I also want to add up to what you said. So when it comes to preparing for application, I would always advise you to start searching for schools really early. Try to look for the kind of schools you want to get into. And most importantly, you need to just find out whether you want to go in for a master's or a PhD. You need to sit down, get yourself a paper. Okay, do I want to, looking at my research experiences, do I think I can get into the PhD program? I'd want to use myself as an example. So as Gabriel said at the beginning, I was actually mentored by Gabriel, and I applied for my PhD whilst in my final year of optometry school. So as Gabriel said, I did not have to complete my school before applying. I applied whilst in school and actually obtained admission whilst in school. So I graduated, and at least I started school. My graduation was before I started school. So I'm just trying to say that you have to plan. You need to plan ahead, plan for the kind of schools that you want to apply for. You want to look out for schools that are waiving GRE, because some people GRE can get a bit expensive, and there are so many schools that are waiving it at the moment. So you look for schools that are waiving GRE, you look for schools that are waiving the English proficiency for citizens from English-speaking countries like Ghana. You look out for all these and then make a list. And as you're making the list, at least you shortlist the list one by one before you can now come to a conclusion that, okay, I want to apply to 5 schools, I want to apply to 6 schools, I want to look for schools that are waiving the application fee as well. There's a lot of it's a journey. I would say it's not just a short process, it's a journey. You need to kind of prepare a lot before you can get a lot of things done. So whilst waiting, you don't need to apply in February because it's not open, the portals are not open, but there are other things you can do backdoor before the portals open, and that's actually what I just suggested to you. Thank you. So we have someone, I think Papa's hands is up.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Good day, everyone.
Good day.
Yeah, okay, my name is Papa Jande from Ghana.
Okay.
Yeah, please, I think concerning what Notifafa said earlier, I think I actually applied for a PhD program just this fall. And then I think about 3 days ago, I received the rejection. But then I had contacted, I think, 2 professors in the school, but they had different kind of research project ongoing. So, I mean, when I received the rejection, before I even applied, I was like, should I concentrate on one of the professors' research work in my statement, or should I kind of write about both of them, kind of have an intertwined kind of research interest? I did that, but then because the rejection came in just about 2 days ago, I'm yet to contact them because one of the professors said I should keep him posted after the decisions are made. But I mean, coming back to what you said, I think I actually agree with what you said, because I feel like probably because I wasn't definite in my research, interest could have been one of the reasons why I got rejected. And also, concerning my case, I have left school since 2015. I read medical laboratories and I left school since 2015. So I have worked in the medical laboratory since then. And then I realized that I think my research experience could have also been a major factor. though I did some good research back then. But then one of the problems was that I think, the school actually gave us professors, randomly to select from. And then I happened to go to one professor who was with the anatomy and then I think cell biology department. But then she was rather working on a bit of forensics. She wanted to do a bit of forensics alongside her research interest. And so that was the project that I joined. So technically, I really couldn't get to kind of a wet lab, most of the wet lab, but then it was a bit of dry lab and a bit of wet lab. And so having left school for a while, I have not really had any major research experience since then. And I think AfriSnet bringing in this program really helps, especially when I heard about the research component of this program. I would like to actually ask, probably, I don't know, but I just want to ask if, based on my research, the length at which I left school, could it have also been a reason why I kind of received a rejection for applying to a PhD about 7 or 8 years later on? I just wanted to ask that question. And also, yeah, and it's Fafa, please, just for a moment, please. Yes. I just wanted to also ask if it will be okay for me to still get back to the professor who said I should keep him posted. And then assuming he affirms the fact that because my research interest wasn't clear and that's why I received the rejection, can I still go on with him? And then probably if I should apply this coming fall, I would rather tailor my research interest to his work, or I should just probably ignore it and then move on to a new school. Thank you.
Yes. So first, very good to meet you, Papa, and
thank you.
Good job trying the application process. Before I
thank you.
Even say anything specific to your case, it's true that a number of students have to apply a few rounds before they get an admission. And there is a number of reasons for that. I want to take this opportunity to sort of give a general answer. These applications are read by people, and anything that is done by humans can be subjective. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And it's also important to know that you are most likely competing against a large number of highly qualified applicants. I always tell African students, start there. Don't start blaming yourself for this and that. You are always going to be applying against a large pool of highly qualified applicants, undergraduate students who have been doing research for years, months, if not years, in many different laboratories. Some of them already have publications that are impactful and what have you. Now, from what I hear, speaking to people who have served on admission committees, international applicants sometimes are assessed separately from domestic students. But even so, there might be a large number of international students who are very well qualified. For example, those who are already here in the United States, coming from India, China, Africa, and other places in the world. So am I going to pinpoint exactly what led to your rejection? No, I cannot. The only person who can is the person who made the decision. But your feelings, I think, are in the right place. It's very possible that your limited research experience might have contributed to the negative decision. I would highly doubt that the time that you've been out of school was a factor, especially if what you were doing was still, somewhat relevant to your undergraduate studies. And so I don't really think that would be the reason, unless you went into something that is completely different from research and now you want to come back in research, then you would have to, or at least completely different from your undergraduate major, then you would have to sort of explain what's going on there. So the statement that you wrote, I don't really think in your statements you have to take 3 paragraphs and elaborate on why research in a specific lab would be good for you. What you need instead is to provide 1 or 2 solid paragraphs that explain your research interests and experience, and then say, this research experience aligns with the research that I see done in laboratories A, B, C, D, who are doing X, Y, Z, and therefore I believe I would be a good fit and I would contribute to the research in these laboratories if I am fortunate to be admitted. So I don't think either that not having focused on one professor and wrote about their research extensively could have been the reason why you received a rejection. So I would think that most likely, unless there are other factors we don't know, it could have been a limited research experience, which, by the way, is by far the #1 limiting factor for African students. That is very painful. It really breaks our hearts. We're doing everything we can, but there is also a lot of limitations against us. And we are still a very small organization. Should you reach out to the professor? If the professor asked you to reach out after the application, you should. If for no other reason, he is on the field and he may have better insights on why the outcome was negative for your application. And so he might give you more specific reasons, for example, by speaking to the admission committee members, and maybe give you indications towards areas where you could improve to increase your chances of admission next year. Now, what I would say is keep trying. Rejection in one school does not mean rejection to all the other schools that you're going to apply to. I applied to many schools. I got rejected by some, got admitted by some. And the funny thing is, when you look at the ranking of the university, universities that rank way lower than the university that admitted me actually rejected me in some cases. And so, again, there is a lot of factors that are involved. It's a subjective decision. These people sometimes have very limited time to read these applications. And so try again. And if you can, apply to multiple universities and programs. I don't know if John or Notifafa have something to add to that, but that's what I would say. But you know, I'm so sorry, Papa, that's the outcome at the moment. But keep on trying.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I would just encourage you to definitely get back in touch with the professor that asked you to get back, because you know, no matter what happens, this is an opportunity to gain another advocate, right? So by getting back in touch with him, that may lead to future discussions. And if you stay in contact with this person for, you know, the next couple of months, maybe you apply to the same school next year and maybe he becomes a stronger advocate for you. So I think it's definitely worth reaching out to that person. Something may come of it, something may not, but it's definitely worth a try.
Yeah.
Sorry, when you reach out, Papa, don't go from a perspective of, I'm deceived. I'm very disappointed. I don't understand why you rejected my application. Okay. Again, you're competing against highly qualified applicants, right? But you can politely ask, right? I understand that, you know, I fell short, but please, what could I do to improve my chances? I'm willing to try again. Okay, that's sort of the perspective that you want to come from as you apply. Okay, because everyone here in the call, you should stay away from the entitlement complex, and so you're always trying, but nothing is guaranteed or entitled to you. Yeah, you have to keep that in mind.
Thank you so much. We have
Thank
approximately
you very
two.
much too.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
I would like to thank all of you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
You're
Thank you very
welcome.
much.
And
You're welcome.
we are more than willing to accept any questions you have. So you can just I'll drop an email. So you could just
Okay.
send an email to our
Okay.
AfriSnet address if you have any more
Okay.
questions. All right.
Thank you
So
very much. I appreciate it.
you're welcome. So we have two questions, and I guess that would be our last questions because we're far behind time. The first question is, please, is non-thesis master's degree a good option? And this is from Andrew.
Andrew, do you mind opening your mic and elaborating a little bit?
Do we have Andrew on the line?
So thesis is defined differently in different. So I'm wondering if he means maybe, I don't know, courses maybe.
Yeah, so I'm actually
without
thinking
research?
it's just coursework because we have some master's programs that do not have like a final project or
Yeah.
it's a non-research master's, so it's just like a coursework master's and you're done.
I see. I mean, if that's your end in itself, and for example, you want to get a master's in statistics and go work for the government or a data science company, that makes sense. But if you want to get then into a PhD, again, the key factor there is to have some research experience. So I would advise to go for a research inclusive master's.
And I would also say for the non-thesis masters, it's sometimes a little bit difficult trying to land on funding. Already, masters in general, when you're trying to obtain funding, is actually difficult. And how much more the non-thesis masters? Because with a thesis masters, you get the opportunity to work in a lab. You get the opportunity to actually assist a professor, and you could obtain opportunities like the teaching assistantship or the research assistantship, and that is actually a form of funding for master's degrees. So I would say, going from that perspective as well, it would be good to go for a thesis master's as compared to a non-thesis, but it ultimately depends on you as the individual, whether that's your end goal or whether you'd want to progress to going in for a PhD.
Yeah.
And
I've put some emails in the chat for everyone to have.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So Gabriel just placed some emails on the chat. If you have further questions, you could just email us and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as possible. Yeah. And the last question we have is from Rebecca, and she says, hi, please, how do you describe your research experience for a PhD application if it's only a thesis and it was just a review you did and you didn't go to the labs? Okay, so let me just summarize what Rebecca is asking. She's just trying to find out that if the research experience you have is just making a review or kind of having a review instead of going to the labs and yeah, something like that. I don't know whether Rebecca, that's actually what you're asking, but
John, do you have any thoughts there? I mean, I can chime in too.
I mean, sort of the biggest thing that's always that these search committees are always going to look for is research experience in a laboratory where you're working in a lab, you're doing experiments. Now, not everyone has that opportunity, in which case, you just sort of, you obviously aren't going to lie or anything. You just need to be honest about what you've done and try to highlight the skills that you've developed that will help your research. So, if you've just done a thesis project and that thesis project was focused, didn't involve much lab work, but was just sort of a review of literature, there's still important skills that you learn from that you can take into a PhD, and you just need to be able to highlight those skills. You needed to develop some sort of methods, you needed to be able to do research, you need to be able to draw conclusions. All of this stuff is part of the scientific process, and you just need to sort of highlight those aspects of it and just try to sort of describe how whatever you've done, whatever research you've done, just how will that benefit your graduate education? How does that prepare you for a graduate education? Now, depending on your project, that may be easier or harder, but that's really all you can do. If you don't have any wet lab experience, then you just have to sort of emphasize what you've learned from your other experiences, and then also hopefully try to continually look for opportunities to get that wet lab experience. Just because you didn't do it as an undergrad doesn't mean there's no other opportunities. There's opportunities through AfriSNet. You can probably find opportunities in your communities. But yeah, I think that's sort of what I have to say. I don't know. Do you have anything to add, Gabriel?
I think that's a really good answer. I think that covers it, right? Think about graduate application as presenting your case, right? And when you are presenting your case, you have to, number one, be ready to use all the tools you have, right? Including your thesis project, but also present those tools in a way that is tailored to your audience, right? And so the folks or the program that you're seeking admission from. I think if you, for example, have that review thesis that is combined with an extensive, for example, practice of laboratory techniques through, for example, laboratory practicums that you've taken as part of your courses, that's a case you could present, right? Maybe you've done some techniques that are relevant to the graduate program that you are applying to. But if part of that review, you've read so many papers, 50 papers or more, or 100, that's not something that every undergraduate student does. So you just have to be able to present your case and tailor it to your audience, right? I have to emphasize here, and maybe this will bring us to the end, Nutifafa, is that most of these questions that we're getting will be answered in great details on Saturday. That's exactly what the webinar on Saturday is about. You'll have plenty of time to ask questions. We are going to delve into these documents that we talked about, these requirements, tell you what they entail, how much they cost, maybe even show you some examples, tell you what the admission committee is, how your applications are read and processed, and all that, okay? And if we are lucky enough, maybe we'll find a professor who's actually served on an admission committee, but I can't promise that, but I will try. But please come back next Saturday. I guess what I would like everybody on the call to do is, and Rebecca, I'm hoping we answered your question, but we're thinking about moving the meeting next Saturday to 3 p.m. GMT instead of 4 p.m. GMT. So that's 1 hour earlier than today. And what I would like everyone on the call is to go in the chat and type yes or no. And then we'll count the yeses and the nos and make a decision from there. And I'll start and I'll say yes, because I think people in Ethiopia and Nairobi, this might be a bit late for them.
Okay. But we'll try our best to send out reminders and emails to everyone. So just be on the lookout in your emails. Try to look through your inbox and look for more information about the upcoming webinar. So thank you so much for making it for today's seminar. It was really nice to hear from all of you from all over Africa, and just spread the word to your friends and whoever wants to get more information or in-depth information about the graduate school application process. This is the best time you should join in just to learn more, and it would help you a great lot. So thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank
Bye.
you, everyone. It was a pleasure interacting with everyone, and we hope to see you on Saturday.